guys, my name is Katie Moreno, and I am going to teach you today about how to make a basic yearbook page layout design. Now, this is super basic. It is the absolute beginning. So if you have a little bit of experience or you've been on yearbook staff before, this is going to be a refresher for you. Also, no matter where you're at, it's going to feel really cheesy, but just stick with us, just go along with it, laugh along. But hopefully this will help you remember all the parts of a yearbook layout, as well as everything that you need to have in order to really tell the story of whatever your topic is. So let's get started. All right, so again, we are talking about basic yearbook page design. So as you can see, this cute little guy, he is King Pica. He has an adorable little crown, and he says, "I'm the king." The reason his name is King Pica is because pica is a term used in graphic design and page layout design. And it's just a unit of measurement, just like inches, just like centimeters. It's another unit, but it does correlate to inches. So there are 6 picas in every inch. And the reason we use that in graphic design is because we're typically working with small measurements, and it's a lot easier and consistent to say it's 1 pica or 2 picas or half a pica than talking about 1/6 of an inch. You know, our brain doesn't really correlate as well to that. And so it's a lot easier to say, like, we use pica spacing. So he is 1 pica by 1 pica, which means he's a square. And so this is him right there. So he decides that he needs a castle. Obviously, he's a king. He needs a snazzy castle. He needs a beautiful castle. He needs a castle that shows off how amazing he is as a king. So as you can see, he purchased this beautiful plot of land. So he decides to hire an architect, and he says that he wants to build a castle and shows off how great he is. So he decides to tell his architect that he needs to start with a hallway, but he wants to make sure that the hallway is not right in the middle of his castle, because that's boring, and the king would never do that. And so in graphic design terms, this hallway is referring to what we call an eye line. And so over here throughout this whole presentation, you'll be able to see there are definitions along the way, so you don't get confused, but you can also write these down if it helps you remember. An eye line is a horizontal guideline that runs across the entire spread. It takes up 1 pica, and it helps visually unify the spread and is used as a place to start and end content elements. So that means that every picture or text box is either going to sit on the eye line or hang down below it or onto another element. And the eye line should never be placed in the middle of the exact spread, again, because that's boring. So you want it to be in that middle third section. You don't want it to be way up at the top, because then you can't put anything above it. Everything's going to be super tiny. You don't want it to be right at the bottom, because then again, there's no room for anything below it. Everything will be super tiny. You want it kind of in that middle third. So as you can see here, he placed his hallway or his eye line a little bit below the middle line. And so he's super happy with that. And then he decided, I'm going to make a rule. This hallway looks great. This hallway is a great size. Everything in my castle must be 1 pica apart. No more, no less. Yes. As you can see, he's super happy about that. Look at that little smile. You can't deny it. So he decides that he wants everything to be even and clean and just like look very balanced. And in order to do that, he's going to make sure that everything in his castle is 1 pica apart. So then he decides he needs another hallway. He likes to dance in that hallway. He loves the hallway, and he needs a way, obviously, to get around his house to it once the rooms are there. So he wants another hallway called an axis in graphic design terms. So this is the same thing as the eye line, just vertical. Super easy, same thing. Everything is going to be anchored to this element. And this is really where the focal point of your spread is. This is meant to draw the audience's eye into one point and then let them dance around the spread. And so this, as you can tell, is the same width as the other one. It's 1 pica vertically, and the eye line is 1 pica horizontally. Nothing crosses over these, and nothing comes close but doesn't touch. They always touch that eye line. So then obviously, because he's the center of attention, he needs a room. He needs a room to live in. His room needs to be the biggest. He needs to make sure that everyone knows that he is the king of this castle, right? So he says, my room needs to be the biggest. So in looking at these 4 quadrants, if everything has to touch those 2 lines, where do you think his room is going to be? Obviously the top left. So he takes up this space in the castle. He takes up this room, and he decides that he's going to go across the middle of the castle, because that's where he wants to show off, the fact that he's the king and he's the center of attention. And so then he says that his room is the biggest and the most important, and it has to be off the 2 main hallways. That's where the party is. That's the center of the house. That's where it's going to go. in yearbook terms, this is where we put our dominant photo. And that's the biggest photo that should immediately attract the reader's attention. It should be the best photo on your spread. It should be an action shot. It should tell a story. It's the most important photo. Just like the king's room is the most important room, as well as it's the biggest. It should be 2 to 3 times bigger than everything else on the spread, just to make sure that it's very clearly the most important. The other thing that's important to point out is that everything in the king's castle and on your yearbook spread needs to be consistently sized and spaced. So as you can see, everything starts and stops on one of these columns. Now, this yearbook spread is 8 columns wide. Some yearbooks decide they want to do 16, so they have a little bit more flexibility. When you're just starting out, I recommend you start with 8. You can always break the rules once you learn the rules, but it's always good to start off with the basics, and then you can tweak from there. And I'll show you at the end a couple of different ways that you can do that. So to start off, you can see he uses 3 columns exactly. So this room starts and stops on this column and on this column. And you can tell that red area is the hallway or the axis, and there's nothing crossing over here, but it doesn't stop here in the middle of this column. It stops exactly on the edge. And then also these columns are exactly 1 pica wide as well. So make sure that precision is key. You can't just drag a box over here and willy-nilly and try and make it look good. It has to be aligned in order for it to look good. So then he decides he's a little lonely. He's this great, majestic, wonderful king. He's super chill, super fun to hang out with, and he's lonely. Look at his sad little face. So he decides he wants to try and find a wife. So he thinks he's going to go to royalmatch.com and try and find this suitor that will come and live with him in this beautiful castle that he's built. So he goes online to royalmatch.com, and that just is not working, right? We all know, royalmatch.com, trash. So he says, okay, we're going to try it old school. We're going to put up some banners. We're going to try and get the word out about how great I am. I need to find a queen the old way. So he's going to tell the world. So in yearbook terms, we call this telling his story, right? He wants to tell the world about his story. So his room is where the action takes place for his life. And so the story is going to be telling where he tells the world about that. So in yearbook terms, we have the very top pink bar here. This is the headline. And this is really large type that is meant to just hook the reader and introduce the reader to the most important part of the story. And then this skinnier one is called the subheadline or subhead. And that's text that's placed underneath it, which gives more info. It usually has, or it should have, a subject and a verb. And it really tells the reader what the story is about. It's not just a mini headline. It really tells more details that the headline didn't already cover. And then you have your story. So these are these 3 banners he's going to hang here by his castle, and he's going to tell the world about who he is and what he's like, and what's happening in his castle, what his life is like. And in yearbook terms, this is where you tell the story of the topic. So it's going to relate to this photo. It's going to relate to this topic of the spread. It's going to include quotes from the source. It's going to include quotes from our king. And it's really just going to tell the audience stuff that they can't tell from this photo. So for instance, if you're doing a football spread, it's going to tell them if they won or lost the game, how they were feeling before, during, and after, what it was like to be a fan, what it was like to be in that moment, whatever it is, it's extra information that they can't tell just straight from this photo. So he's looking for his queen, and he's like, okay, I got to make sure I don't just overwhelm the world, right? So you want to tell them the most important stuff first, then the other stuff. So that way, if you have to shorten the story or you have to adjust for other content, you have the ability to, because you've already told them the most important stuff early on. So in that story, make sure you tell them the most important stuff at the top. So then after he puts this banner out, he finds a queen, and he says to her, "Be my queen." And she says, "Okay." And look at her. She's blushing. She has her pretty little crown with all her jewels, and she is just so in love with him. She is like, "I can't wait to live in this castle with you. You seem like such a nice guy. You are beautiful. You have a great pica, a little square. I love it. Give me that diamond ring. I want to marry you." Kissy face, whatever. They get married. So then he decides, okay, listen, I love you, but I think you need your own space, which makes sense, right? Because just because you're married doesn't mean you have to spend every waking moment with each other, right? Pro tip from me and from King Pica. So he says, all right, I don't want to spend every waking minute with you, but I love you and I want you to have a big, beautiful space to have as your own, but just not as big as mine because I'm the king, okay? And I built this for you. So, whatever. And she's fine. She loves it here. So she says, okay, perfect. But he wants the rooms to be close together, just across the hallway. And so she gets the next biggest room down below. And so it takes up the next biggest quadrant. It's, spacious. It goes across that middle area there. In your book, that's called the gutter. And she loves it. She's super happy. They're having a great time. They're loving their life. Look at her. She's so happy. So then, they're living one pica, the hallway across the eye line isn't very big. And so they're in love. They're living their best life, right? And so eventually, what happens after you get married and you're in love? Well, they have a little baby pica. They have a prince pica. And so they say, well, the firstborn should get the next biggest room, of course, obviously. So they are going to put him across this hallway again, into this next biggest quadrant and fill this space up and give him this beautiful big room. And he is just having a great time in there. He has his little crown, his little shoes. Look at his little tongue. He's so cute. Okay. And so then they decide they do want more kids, but they're really not feeling twins or triplets because that again would be like a little boring. I personally don't think twins or triplets would be boring. I think that's a little the opposite of boring, but that's what the king wants. So that's what the king gets. So they decide that they're going to have a lot more kids. They're going to have one over here. They're going to have one over here. They're going to have one here and here. So they decide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids is what they want. And so they give each one their own room, some bigger than others, depending on if they're a baby or they're getting older. As you can see, their son is old now. He has this big room versus this baby over here. And they are just so happy. They have so many rooms in their castle. It's just great. However, they have a lot of kids, right? So they need each room to have a label. And they think maybe we have too many. I don't know. No, there's never too many kids. But so each room needs a label because we want to make sure that they don't get confused because there's just so many kids, right? So they want to make sure that they label each room with what we call in the yearbook world a caption. And this is a reader service. This helps the reader know each photo, who's in each photo, what the photo is about, and what's going on in the photo, as well as some extra details sometimes. So as you can tell, these orange boxes here, these are called captions, and they're going to relate to each photo. So this one's going here, this one goes to here, this one's going to, actually, that's wrong. That goes to this one. Sorry about that. This one goes up here, this one goes down, down, and then this one's to the main one. Notice even the king's room has a label. Even though the story is relating to it, it's important that each photo has a caption, even if they have a story attached to it, even if it's on a divider, and even if it's on a title page. Every single photo in your book needs to have a caption. There's some exceptions to this later. Like I said, once you know the rules, you can break the rules, and where you just identify who's in the picture. But if you can, at a minimum, every photo needs to have a caption. And as you can see, there's also some space over here. This might be where the garden is in their castle. But that's okay. Don't feel like you have to fill up every space on your spread with a caption, or a picture. Like, it's okay to kind of let things breathe a little bit and leave some room. The other thing I'll say is, while we don't have any twins or anything, like, we could easily make this picture go up to here and we could put the caption here and still have white space. This is more visually interesting to leave that space a little bit bigger and have pictures that are different sizes. So when you're planning your spread, you want to think about your topic. If you're doing golf, you're going to have a lot of vertical pictures, but you don't want all vertical pictures. So if you want to mix it up, you need to have a picture that's a square that fits. So it might be someone, the coach and a player talking to each other. And so you want to think about that. Like, you don't want to get all your pictures on the spread first because they might all be vertical and that you might not have one dominant and it doesn't look as good because it wasn't intentional. So you would definitely want to make sure it's intentional. The other thing that you want to make sure is, when you're at this stage, is that all of your copy, which is all your written text, so your story, your captions, your headline, is all around the outside of the spread. So as you can see, all the pink and the orange is around the outside. You don't want to flip that around. So that is prevented because we've anchored everything to this axis and this eye line here. But sometimes if you're just throwing stuff on a spread and you're not doing it with intention, like intentionally, you can get like where you want to put a caption here and you want to flip these two. And that's what's called trapped text. And we don't allow that in yearbook. And the reason is because visually you want your audience to go here and then here and then here, just in the same way that we put stuff on the spread. That's where your audience wants to go. The text is secondary. We want them to look at pictures first. And if there's text and pictures like all mixed in here in the middle, then it's very confusing and cluttered. So you want to make sure all your text is around the outside. Okay, so now moving back to the story, you can tell that he has all these kids, right? And so what you can see is in this, there is a line that is white all the way around here. If you're following my mouse, this is what we call in yearbook terms the margin. And in the castle, we're going to call it, obviously the moat. And so because he has all these kids, the king says, okay, we have a new rule, fam. We are not going to cross the moat. There are alligators in there. They bite and then you will bleed. And that translates to yearbook terms because we actually call it the bleed. It is the extra space around your page that is intentionally printed and then trimmed by the printer. The standard bleed size is 1/8 of an inch and usually used to allow for movement during the paper during printing. So what that means, as you can see, we have alligators here. This is a margin. This space in between our elements and the gray line, which is the edge of the paper, is called the margin. This is left intentionally blank. And then this space right here is the paper that it's printed on. And then whenever your yearbook is put together, where this gray line is where it's cut. And the reason we leave this margin around the outside is because this can shift a little bit. And so if you have text all the way to this edge and it shifts, that text can get cut off. And so you want to leave a little space all the way around here that doesn't have text or images because you don't want them to get cut off in printing and production. And so just remember there's alligators in this edge and you don't want to get too close. This is really, really important and really something that a lot of yearbooks I think do poorly when they're just getting started is because it's so tempting to just use every bit of space you have to go around here. And really when you look at good yearbook design, they leave quite a bit of space around the edges, even more than traditional because it's called room to breathe. And it really makes your design look a lot better. And so if you can leave those margins completely empty because there's alligators there and you don't want to get bit and you don't want to bleed. So all right, so now we're going to talk about how to make it come to life. That's the end of our King Pica story. But I took that layout and then I put some pictures in it just to make it come to life, to make it go from this like cringy story to a yearbook spread. So as you can see here, we have some pictures in there. This is football. Obviously, these are just from Google. They're really pixelated and horrible, and they're obviously different teams. But just to show you what it could look like. Remember when you're doing a yearbook spread, like I said, you want to plan your pictures out ahead of time. So you can tell this is a vertical picture and that's great. Crops him off a little bit, not as good, but it's okay because that's probably our guy, right? But then you can see you have the coach relationship here, you have before game, you have fans, you have huddle, and you have another in-game play. So obviously football isn't only about playing football, and it's not like the life of a football player isn't just about playing football. And so you want to show all the elements of it. So that's how you get this story. Like this is a great moment. He's either happy with him or he's mad at him. I'm assuming he's happy because he's hugging him. But there's emotion here, right? Like you can tell. And so you want to tell that story about this photo. Obviously, these are just fillers. So we have I'm a headline and I'm an interesting subhead and whatever. But you can tell that this is an interesting picture that people want to read more about. This is quite a long yearbook story. Really, these days, stories this long aren't really done. And so that's one of those examples of where you can learn how to do it and then you can break the rules. So instead of having a story that's 3 columns and taking up half a page, you might move this picture over and take up, more space and have a smaller story. Or an alternative story. It doesn't have to be a big article like this with quotes and transition, quote, transition. It might be quotes from the team about their captain, about their coach, the relationship their coach they have, if there's a story there. Remember, you want your content to drive your design. And so if there's a particularly interesting story, like let's design for that instead of having to find a story to fit our really cool design. It's much easier to go the other way around. So like find the story first and then figure out how to like design to showcase that in the best way. The other thing I'll point out in looking at this is there is a line right here. Remember I told you that was called the gutter. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. You never, ever want text to go across this gutter. And the reason is the same reason that we don't want things to go all the way to this edge is because in book production, those pages are like folded together. And if there's words stuck in there, it can cut off letters. It can make words look really funky. It can cause for some really hilarious, like quote unquote typos, even though they're not typos. It's just the letters go away and then it doesn't look as good and it doesn't read as well. And so you never want text to go across this gutter, and you never want faces to go across this gutter. So as you can see, this line goes all the way down as you follow my cursor here, but there's no faces in it. This goes straight between these people right here, and it's, their faces are focused over to the left. There is some dead space in this photo, but it's okay because the action is still right here. And it's not distracting, I think, because you can also see the joy right here in these, people that are out of focus. And then you can tell that still, I just replaced all of my little caption boxes with actual captions and here, and they're all around the outside of the spread, remember? And then I also added what's called mini headlines. And so these are little headers that just give a tease as to what the photo is about. So they might relate to the theme, they might relate to the actual photo, they might relate to the topic, but they're just kind of a hook that get the audience to like be interested in what that caption is about. Secondarily, they're a visual element that incorporate color, they incorporate your fonts again, and they add context again to your photo that relates to your theme, which it can be really helpful when you're struggling to get theme content in there. And then speaking on theme, you can tell this is a pretty basic spread, right? Like there's no visual element, there's no page numbers or folios. This is just the content. So this is where we start, and then we can go and make it more interesting. And like I said, once you know the rules, then you can break the rules. So let's work on that a little bit. So what I would do is if someone, brought the spread to me, I'd be like, this is a great start. Let's make it even better. So to do that, the first thing I do, you can see on the left page, is those captions were left justified, and we're going to make them right justified to make them face the gutter. If possible, it's not always possible, but if you can, you want to make everything face the middle of the page. You don't want people running off the page. This is a great example right here. He is running off that page. So what's the audience's eye doing? Even subconsciously, they're running off the page. So this I would want to swap with over here. And so that way I can, these people would also be facing the page better. And he would be running towards the middle right here. So he'd be running this way. So I would just take this whole section here and swap it with this, and then move these guys over as well, because the gutter would still fit right here. The tendency, or the temptation, I guess, would be to flip this photo, and you don't want to do that because because of journalistic integrity, that's going to change the actual photo, which we don't do in journalism. And then the other thing is there's numbers in his jersey, which is the bigger deal. And then it's very obvious that you flipped it. So don't sacrifice integrity for design, but design with intention, so that way you don't have to. So if you moved this over there, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. And sometimes that takes some like negotiation. Like sometimes you have to be like, okay, well, this picture is great right here, and but I need to move it over on the other side, and that kind of thing. And so that's why it takes a lot of thought to make a really great yearbook spread, because that doesn't look bad, but it would look better over here. Okay, and now moving on between this one and this one, you can see this left-hand side right here. I swapped out this picture of the coach with what we call a sidebar or secondary coverage. And so this is a great way to incorporate your theme copy and your theme elements. And so your theme element might be circles. What do you think might be a play on the theme with the U being in color. And it also incorporates color. So you could do a color block behind these circles that incorporate this blue and green. You can also put things behind elements. Like if circles, you could put a light circle right here or something to incorporate your theme elements as well. The other thing you can do is incorporate, like in this empty space here, maybe put a big circle that has a pull quote from the story. The other thing is that picture wasn't great, right? Like he was just yelling. Like that's not really that interesting. That's kind of a filler anyway. I'd much rather see more kids in the book than the coach yelling at someone. And so look for ways to do that. Look for ways to swap things out. We had a requirement that every page had to have some sort of secondary coverage. And these days, some pages are all secondary coverage. They have a dominant with a story and a headline and stuff, but then they have lots of little stories, lots of little segments, and that makes it a lot more interesting to look at for your audience. Okay, so then I just played around with some different design elements. Some people put strokes around their photos. It's not quite like on trend right now to just throw strokes around all your photos. But if it's done with intention, you can make a big impact and really highlight certain photos and highlight certain things, and also incorporate color. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing you can see is I did a pull quote. So again, incorporating color, incorporating another font, making it like really stand out. And then the story also is a little bit shorter. It's more interesting to read this way than just a block of text, which no one honestly wants to read, right? Okay, so the next thing I did is move this over here. This is really trendy, is to overlap pictures with a little white border or stroke around it because it sets it apart. It creates a layered effect, which is really trendy and is done quite often. Um, and then the other thing is to play with how you do your headlines. Now, this isn't something you'd want to do just on one spread. You'd want to do it on all of them and consistently and stuff. But don't feel like you have to have your headline at the top of your story. Like you can move stuff around and play with it and get those different visual elements on your spread without feeling like you have to have it all like traditional. The headline's on top and then the subhead and then the story. Like you can definitely play with things like this. Again, know the rules and then you can break the rules. Okay, and then the last one I have to show you is just another way to incorporate some theme elements. So if you happen to have sharp angles or slants into your theme, you can chop your pictures into those shapes. I did this in PowerPoint, so I couldn't really show you, but I would also make this picture kind of come out like this. To mimic it, I would bring this caption into here and mimic this angle. You could also have this story fill in here and kind of cuddle with this picture to fill in that. You could also incorporate that circle that we talked about right here and put a pull quote on it and fill up this space that way. I wouldn't leave this empty space here. The other thing I did is I pulled this photo down into this bleed. And so what that would do is if you print it, it would actually be down to here and then it would cut off right there, but there's nothing that would be cut off that would be like detrimental to the meaning of the spread. And so if you have a picture that is really good and you want it to kind of go off the edge, then you bring it all the way to that bleed line, as long as it's not a face or a text, and it can actually like really make your whole design kind of come to life. It looks bigger than, bigger than the actual book, which is a really cool effect. All right, guys, so I hope this helped. I hope that you have a good understanding of what a yearbook spread consists of, what your priorities need to be in terms of the order it takes to create a yearbook spread and put it together. Remember, you want to go get your content first, and then you want to build your design around your content. But then once you have it on there and you feel really confident about your story and your quotes and your pictures, then you can start to manipulate and break those rules to create a really great, interesting yearbook spread that your student body actually wants to look at and not just flip past. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.